Go ahead and do your next one, and then we'll each do our last one. How about that?
Okay, sounds good. Um, so that was another challenging one that's been staring me down for a while, and so I just kept going with the challenging books, and I grabbed Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I've been meaning to read this one for years also, but I've been intimidated because the language, it's like it's like old British. Like it's what did I write down? This is it's more of a formal, like old English
Yeah.
type. This was not anything like I thought the story was going to be. This was very much a it was about Frankenstein lamenting about how horrible his life has been and woe is me and I've just my life is so bad and I've just been a tortured soul and never make my mistakes, you young sweet summer child, telling his story to this other guy. But I really enjoyed the language. I listened to this on audio and I'm really glad I did because it was narrated by some old British guy, and it was perfect because that's the tone, and the language was so rich and immersive and like just comfortable, and I really enjoyed that. The story was very much about depression and this guy talking about how much he's suffered. He's just suffered so much. And it just screams of privilege. And, this rich kid who's had everything handed to him, this, rich white male. It's a bunch of privilege and depression. And I thought that the depression was well captured. And you could tell that someone was just clinically depressed. And this was his life. And it really wasn't about the monster hardly at all, really. Or that's not what I focused on in the story. Like, there was a whole... The monster was persecuted, and the Frankenstein ended up, like, turning him into a monster. Like, he didn't create him as a monster, but then
Frankenstein himself was the monster. That's, yeah.
Through his actions, he turned his monster into a monster, basically. He forced his hand. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too.
The major theme that the two major themes that came across to me was his intense privilege.
Yeah.
And his lifelong depression. Those are the two things that mainly stuck out with me. And I'm going to carry the whole depression thing into the next book that, I read, but I want you to talk about your last one first.
I might struggle a bit trying to talk about this one here. I've actually made notes and things like that, which I usually don't do. I usually just wing talking about books. But this one needed some forethought. So what I read, the last thing I read in March was Not That Bad, Dispatches on Rape Culture, edited by Roxane Gay. And this was a collection of essays of survivors and people's experience with rape culture, and sexual assault. It's so easy to know that these things are bad. Rape is a horrible thing. Awareness about rape culture is such a prevalent thing these days, and sexual assault is something that's getting called out more and more. But to listen or read almost 9 hours worth of firsthand accounts of survivors and their experience, to just feel it so closely it was frustrating in that half the population already is very aware of all of this. They are so hyper aware of it on a daily basis. And even though to think that in the media that there's so much awareness right now but there's such a disconnect still in just the awareness itself. The title of the book is not that bad, but not only is it that bad, it's worse. It's so much worse. This book really exposed, or these writings expose how ingrained in media these just concepts covering for just the everyday culture of rape culture. It's been named already, so I don't know why I'm trying to not to call it something else. It makes it so obvious when it should be before, but it makes it so plain, and you see it so clearly. Or someone that would argue that rape culture or that the issue of rape is on its way out, like it's almost solved, we're almost there, you know. I feel like that is the message that media is trying to send right now, that we're taking care of the problem, but it's still so much there. And these essays very much expose that. This was a very, very difficult read, as you know, as I was talking about it all through reading it.
Yeah.
But that's fine. And of course it's difficult to read. This is a very painful subject.
Yeah.
But people lived this. This is people's actual accounts, and so the discomfort one takes on in reading this is nothing compared to what these people actually suffered.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take a moment here, and thinking about how I was going to talk about this, I wanted to very much not talk about me in this, but I feel like I just have to take a selfish moment here and reflect on it a little bit. The stories in here, I always thought I was an okay person. I was a mostly good person. And not to say that reading this made me realize I was a rapist or anything, but I, as a naive kid and being a middle school boy or going through puberty and all of that bullshit that comes along with that, but mostly as a young man, I definitely was not part of the solution in a lot of situations. I was telling you earlier today, this made me question my own sense of decency. It very much made me reflect on times that I needed to behave better. I needed to say something. I needed to not laugh at a joke that was in bad taste. I needed to not say things like, what the fuck she is so angry about? What's her problem? So, just in that, I feel like this book or books like this need to be not just required reading, but required to be read to just everyone right now at this point. It's this, a huge part of this issue is perpetrated by one gender, but it is not a single gender issue, which these essays reflect. These are stories from all spectrums of sexuality and gender, and I lost my train of thought.
I think what you were going for is not only are there male and female victims, but there are also men and women who are perpetuating negative rape culture, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it just makes someone as naive as I was, as embarrassing as that is, this brings so much to light. And this is a huge problem, that one more is too many. I mean, that's in the introduction to this entire thing. But I wanted to just read some quotes that I did this on audiobook. I didn't tab these out in a book or underline them or anything. They just stuck in my head. And so I just wanted to read some of them. I probably should have put a huge trigger warning at the beginning of
You still can.
this entire thing. Anyway, so here we go. If he finds me and I'm asleep, maybe he'll leave me alone. The rapist does not care if you were asleep. I told myself it wasn't rape because you stopped when I screamed. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. He was stronger than me. By 16, I was sure the only thing I had to offer the world was my body. And for a long time, the world told me I was right. He did it again, Mom. Your husband did it again. What are you talking about? She said, like she didn't know. I didn't want it, but I didn't say anything because I wanted to be a fun girl. Media tells me that because I'm over 40, I need to be thankful a random man on the street yelled he'd like to fuck me in the ass while I walk my daughter to the library. I still got it. If you survive rape, you have to prove it. You have to prove it was horrible, because at least you're not dead. At least they didn't kill you, the psychologist told me. But I was killed. Those men killed the person I was that day. That person does not exist anymore. Progress is slow, but it is progress. If I prepare myself well enough, I can sit at a dinner table that has a steak knife. I have AIDS, he said into my ear before he ejaculated inside me. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to die. I didn't say no because I didn't want to die. I didn't scream because I didn't want to die. I didn't fight because I didn't want to die. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to die. What was the next thing you read in March?
Wow. Thank you for giving that transition to me. Oh.
Sorry.
No, that's, whew. Well, I was gonna go on a whole thing about depression, but that sounds way more depressing than what I was gonna talk about. So I just finished this one today. This was another intimidating read for me, but for a different reason. I finished The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Okay, I might start over. I finished The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt today. I have hesitated to pick this up because I loved The Secret History so much that I reread it about 4 times last year, and I think 2 times the year before. And I needed to make sure that that story was completely out of my head, that I was completely done with that story before I picked this one up, because I didn't want to constantly be comparing the two.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew that even though the story is completely different, it's the same author, right? And I didn't want to get partway through this one and be like, well, this isn't The Secret History. I'm going to put this one down and go read The Secret History, you know? But I was finally ready for this one, and I'm really glad I picked this up. I didn't realize what a chunker of a novel this is. This is about 750 pages. And I'm glad I did this on audio because Donna Tartt has an interesting way of writing kind of... They're not boring stories, but they're very contemporary. Like, not a lot happens. It's a person's life. They're just going through their life, and then something kind of crummy happens, and it sparks their life off into a different direction. This one follows Theo Decker, and in the beginning of the novel, he's 13 years old, and his mother dies. And through circumstances, his life is... he's ping-ponged off into this completely different direction than he ever would have been, and he ends up going through a lot of tragedies. He has a lot of people in his life die tragically. He goes through a lot of depression. He self-medicates with a lot of drugs and alcohol. He makes friends with self-destructive people. There are a few bright spots in his life. He makes friends with this great older gentleman who tries to teach him a craft. He teaches him how to restore old antiques, and he teaches him how to love and appreciate antiques, and introduces him to this completely other social strata of rich elites, and so he spends his life kind of... during the day he hangs out with these rich elites, and then, you know, at night he's this self-destructive, like, addict who's just completely depressed, right? And everything is wrapped, or his entire life is wrapped around this painting that came into his possession when he was a child, and it's this giant secret that he's held on to for his entire life, and it makes him make weird choices, and it causes so much anxiety and tension in his life. And I don't know, it's just, it's a weird story. I don't think I'll ever reread it, but I'm really glad I read it this time. And the entire theme of the story, I remember I told you at one or two points, I'm like, I'm surprised this kid hasn't killed himself yet. Like, this entire story is about someone who is living with suicidal depression who just refuses to kill themselves. Mm-hmm. Like, through all of his actions, he makes irresponsible choices and doesn't really care if he lives or dies in a lot of these ways. You know, he's slowly killing himself with drugs and alcohol and shitty associations with bad people, but he just lives in that zone. And I'm really glad, like, at the very end of the book, it does a few pages of, like, talking about that middle zone, right, that this character just lives in, that weird in-between. It's about depression, and then it's also about art, and I like how those two are connected, because a lot of artists typically struggle, right, with mental health issues and depression and things like that. And I don't know. I don't really... my thoughts aren't completely clear on this one yet, but it's a weird story, and I'm glad I read it. I remember my note here was, like, I wrote down, I thought Frankenstein dealt with depression because I read them back to back, Frankenstein and The Goldfinch, and The Goldfinch really upped the game on the depression zone.
Well, talk about a big one. This video,
an hour long.
So thank you for joining us. By the time we get this one put up, we'll see you next time, everyone.